at least count the vocals, because I don't know how much. I think we only got through like 2 or 3 tunes last time when we were mixing there.
Yeah, so it's almost
that
like
that was like kind of futile.
well, it's like a day. It takes about a day a song, so you may as
And I don't
well.
know if we wound up even using those mixes.
Oh, we built. Well, I think we built all. But yeah, the mix. Thank you.
So lately it's been kind of a cool thing. I've been pulling out some of the vinyl that our parents actually made. They made a bunch of vinyl while we were growing up and even before we were born. And I've been listening to a lot of the vinyl that they made and the Southern gospel music that they made, and it's been really influencing some of the writing that we've been getting into on this record in particular. And the first probably 7-8 years of my brother and I's lives were spent on the road with my parents. They would travel all over the country and sing at little country festivals and backyard barbecues, but after Sunday morning church, and it's just kind of instilled in us at a young age. So kind of been digging on some of the Southern gospel music stuff that they had been doing, and didn't realize how much it was actually in us at a young age, that kind of music.
I think it's more of a roots, back to the roots feel for us. I mean, I think with the other 2 that we had done, we've approached it a little bit differently too. I think a little bit more like where this record has more of a rootsy, organic feel. I think it feels more like something if my parents could do something today, it probably would sound a lot like this. So that's kind of a cool adventure for us.
Listening to the old records that their parents made, you're finding this trend where people are starting to explore simpler folk music again. It's kind of a resurgence. And the last record, it had a lot of different textures, and I think it went to a lot of different places. But this one, it's a little bit more kind of boiled off all that stuff and getting down to the song and the vocal and the message of the songs.
Just because I wrote these songs with a lot of them. You listen to a lot of old music, and it all revolves around the same strumming patterns, that you hear in old gospel music and folk music. And when you're actually writing songs that literally sound like they could have been written in that era, it's like, well, you can't approach it the way that music has been, I guess, recently or in the last few years. You almost have to approach it with a fresh perspective to pull from the old and bring it into the new and make it sound fresh and revitalized.
Mm-hmm. I think when the boys sent me the song demos, there's definitely a handful of tunes that are actually written in the stylings of that old folk gospel, but some of them sound like they could also go into more contemporary directions. So it's been interesting to marry these songs together sort of under the banner of this folk gospel rootsy approach. The ones that were more straightforward, written that way, they kind of naturally took their shape. I really have always been someone who likes creating hybrids. So even though this record won't sound like a hybrid, I think that I still get to tickle that itch, because you have songs that are more written in a contemporary fashion. Now we're taking them and putting an old folk gospel arrangement on them. They probably wouldn't have written songs like those ones back in the day, but we're taking a modern style songwriting, not for all the songs, but and then breathing that sort of folk gospel approach to it. It's been an interesting and fun journey these past 2 weeks doing that. So.
I think it was interesting when Kenneth and I got together to play ideas for this record, we noticed that the word home kept coming up in the ideas that we both had been writing individually, and we didn't talk about it beforehand, so it was just like both had been writing with the word home in our ideas. And normally you'd hear that and go, maybe we shouldn't say that word so much, or we should dim it down a little bit in some of these songs. But it actually kind of felt like something that we needed to pinpoint for this record. So we decided to call the record Home in the spirit of the word home coming up in all these, and a lot of, at least 6 or 7 of the 12 tunes has the word home in it. None of the songs are actually called home, but we wanted the record to kind of have this feeling of finding home on your journey, that we hope when people hear these songs that they find home and they find peace when they hear not only the lyrics of the songs, but they hear the feel of these songs and the grooves. And
I wanted people to listen to it and feel like they've almost heard it before. You know, I guess saying that, like, I just, hopefully we've done a good enough job capturing what we grew up on and the references that we were trying to go after. I want people to just kind of feel like, wow, I think I've almost heard this before, you know?
Sort of a familiar.
Yeah, a familiar feel. Some of my favorite themes on this have been, like one of my favorite songs on the record is I'll Be With You Always. And I think for me, that song really captures where my heart's been at lately. You know, some of the lyrics are just, you know, whether I'm out or I'm in, I'll be with you always. Or, you know, just thoughts of just going on this journey with Christ and how it's not always super easy, but God, how He gives. I believe because I've seen you can save when there's no other way. I mean, I think if I had to sum up what I would want people to gather from, take away, would be that lyric.
in the theme of what he said of feeling out or in, we need to know that Christ is constantly pursuing us. And whether you work in a church as a worship leader, or whether you work in a business or doing things in and out of the church, I want this to be, we wanted to write lyrics, I think, that were in a working man's language. I think when you hear some of the old folk albums like the Levine Brothers or Johnny Cash, or even Hank Williams made a record called I Saw the Light. One of the things I love about it is it's these guys that definitely had issues, definitely had addictions, as musicians, but were very candid about it and wrote these songs that were in a working man's language. So I think what people love about Johnny Cash is this honesty that he would portray in his songs. That to me is worship. It's a man searching to find home where he's at on the journey. And so to me, I wanted to write worship songs that embodied a language that people inside and outside of the church body could relate to. Folks that maybe grew up Christian but walked away from the church and hadn't been in the church in 20 years. So I think that's important on this record, to have songs that had that kind of double standard, but a good double standard.
So my mother recorded her first record when she was 14 years old. Her maiden name was McClurg, and it was a band that started with her, my grandfather, my aunt, and my uncle. And they were a southern gospel group from upstate New York, which was kind of an interesting, what oxymoron I guess you could say. But
Especially back then.
yeah. So they traveled all over the country, and they were called the McClurg Family Singers. When it came time for my brother and I to change, or kind of what do we want to call ourselves, our grandfather was really the guy that sort of taught us how to lead worship and live a life consistent following Christ. And so we thought, be kind of cool to do something called, throwing back kind of a tribute to them. And so came out with Brothers McClurg, partially because we're McClurgs and partially because we're brothers.
Those are the two parts.
Yeah, married as one.
So it's a lineage of folk gospel music,
Yeah,
carrying the torch.
yeah.
Gospel folk music kind of has its roots in kind of getting together with people you love, people in the church, and you sing these songs. It's a very grassroots sort of music, and I feel like it might be some of kind of the last of that since the recording industry has entered humanity. So I guess my question is, how do you think, now that there's a recording industry, how do you think that has influenced sacred music as opposed to even like back when Bach would write for the church, or the hymns, these elaborate pieces that were never recorded for hundreds of years. Folk music continuing that lineage with maybe not a brilliant composer, but someone would just pour their heart out onto a page, and then you'd sing together without having a recording of it. How do you think that has influenced sacred music and how it's written and how you approach it?
Well, I think, like you said, sacred music in general, I think no matter where, I guess what I was thinking as you were asking the question is that back in Bible times, they didn't have a way to get worship songs to the next community, sometimes even just a mile or two away, right? So like the worship leader of a community was actually charged with the task to write songs that were coming out of that particular community. And they, so you have all these communities writing different worship songs based out of experiences that their particular people were having. So what I think the way that the recording industry has changed sacred music is that now we get to hear what other communities are experiencing, sometimes across the world. So worship leaders go into their churches every weekend, and then they're at home and they're thinking about, maybe a couple that needs, a healing in their lives. And so they write a song about healing, and that song then gets put on a record, and then we're singing it at our community, states and miles away. So I think that it's brought us closer in that sense, but I also think that it's taken away from the task of writing songs for your own community, because now we rely on a California community to sing in an upstate New York community, to write.
Yeah.
When are they going to write more songs so we can? So I would say that, to also go off of what Chris was saying, even though we have access to all these great songs, it still is important for us as musicians to write songs from our community's perspective as well, and be able to offer that in worship to the Lord, so that we're saying what our people would be saying. And I think that's important.
I think that's kind of the genesis of this record. You're talking about folk and gospel music. You think of Dylan in the 60s writing these protest songs that were a voice for a generation or a voice for a people. And even going further back than that, I think that folk music and Christianity were really, there was a togetherness to them. So when you hear those old records, I love that there's so much talk about Lord help me or God help me in this situation. They were one and the same,
Yeah.
So I think whether you're Christian or non-Christian, if you're watching this and you're like, I'm not a Christian, I think it's interesting if you go back, that really folk music came out of a sacred place. And to me, I think there's a beauty in that, and I think we wanted to try to capture, in our own humble way, to try to capture where folk and gospel music collide with the sacred again, and kind of being able to express that in a way that's very worshipful, and taking it back to the roots of it, to folks in slavery writing these great spirituals, or even before that. And I think that really, as people of faith, that's our heritage. You know, that's something that is behind us that we can pull from, and maybe, you know, is something I'm excited in the days ahead to see expounded upon in the conversation of worship and sacred music even more, which is fun. And so in some humble way, we're just making a very honest record, in the hopes that folks will hear it and hear an honesty in it. Whether it means you cover these songs in your church or not, we just want these songs to sound like guys that are walking out their journey and just finding God in the days and the moments of their lives and trying to capture that in a song.